Whoopi Goldberg is being cancelled for her wrong and hurtful Holocaust comments. Now there's a headline I never expected to see. Never mind Whoopi and the Holocaust in the same sentence, but Whoopi Goldberg being cancelled is downright unbelievable. She is a media darling, a key cornerstone of the mainstream establishment, and yet even she can get cancelled, albeit only for 2 weeks, mind you, even after apologizing, even after immediately realizing that, whoops, I've said something controversial, best spin around and faceplant into a prostration position so as to apologize immediately. And even then, even though you can practically see the mid-Atlantic ripples of her leaping into a rowing boat and begin backpedaling furiously, she's still suspended for 2 weeks because while Whoopi has apologized, I've asked her to take time to reflect and learn about the impact of her comments. And again, Whoopi Goldberg, she has been represented again and again as the godmother, the fairy godmother of the actor class. She is their Mother Teresa, the woman who could do nothing wrong, their beacon of virtue. A year or two ago, this would never have happened, no matter what she had said. And what's so interesting here is this is so much more than Whoopi committing a verbal whoopsie. This is the establishment, the cathedral that's beginning to quiver ever so slightly. Going after the hard targets like Joe Rogan just hasn't been working out for them recently. They haven't been enjoying the kind of success that cancel culture has gotten used to, and so they've decided to try and go for something a bit more rounded and a bit more softer. Someone they know will apologize for practically anything. And Whoopi turned out to be the precise target they were looking for. Now, whether this will remain with just a 2-week suspension, well, we'll see how it goes. But what is interesting as well is, and hear me out here, because here's the thing, right? Everyone is abandoning Whoopi now. Her friends, her families, her fans, her compatriots and companions are all spinning around and giving her the cold shoulder and the bare ass cheeks for actually kind of having a point. A quarter of a point anyways. And so, fear not, Whoopi, tremble not in your kaiju-sized shoes, for I shall ride to your defense. I shall defend Mount Whoopi, because your name has Berg in it, and Berg means mountain, which is quite fitting, and so Mount Whoopi shall be defended. Goldberg sparked controversy during Monday's broadcast during a discussion about the graphic novel Mouse, which, goddamn it. The mainstream has finally caught up to Mouse, has it? A graphic novel from, what, the 1980s, early 1990s? Oh, well, they're only 30 to 40 years behind the rest of us, I guess. It's something. When she claimed that the Holocaust was not about race. Ooh, big whoopsie there, Whoopi. Because the Nazis and the Jews were both white, she asserted. That man's inhumanity to man was the real issue. And here's the funny bit, because there is a point to be made there, but it is a point to be made from Whoopi's own point of view. For a, let's be frank here, racial activist like Whoopi, the world is divided into very clear-cut black and white, if you will, races. You've got white people, you've got black people, you got brown people, and you got some yellow people in the mix. But the Nazis viewed this quite differently. For them, race wasn't entirely about skin color. In fact, they had a rather, if you will excuse the term, a fluid interpretation of race, where you had the Aryans, the master race. They were obviously at the top, but there were many different kinds of Aryans with many different kinds of values attached to them. The Iranians, for example, were Aryans. The Han Chinese were Aryans. The Japanese were Aryans. And the title Honorary Aryan could also be handed out willy-nilly to those who proved adequately useful to the Nazi regime. They also had a whole host of qualifiers for this. They wrote books on this bullshit. They were, you could even say, rather obsessed with the idea. For example, The true Aryans, the Norman and the Germanic Aryans, they were very in percentages there as well. Germany, for example, was about maybe 50, 60 odd percent Aryan, and that was a mix. And then you had the Scandinavian countries, which were farther up on the rink. Like Norwegians were about 80%, Swedes were a little bit above that even. Shows you how little the Nazis know about anything, as they were above 80%. And you remember the calipers, right? The whole measuring of the skull thing? That was one part of it. You need to have a certain skull structure, your nose needed to look so-and-so, your eye color, your hair color, whether your hair was straight or curly, etc. There was a whole host of things. Even I, as a Norwegian, would only score about 5 or so out of 7 points. I've got relatively light hair, but not light enough. It's straight. I do have the correct nose, but I don't have a strong enough chin to be entirely Aryan, you see. And this also varied based upon the various other races too. Like the English, for example, they were considered part of the Aryan race, but much lower down on the ranking pole than the Germans. The Mediterranean Aryans were also Aryans, but not quite as good as the Germanic Bahrains. And then you also had the Alpine Aryans. Oh, Jesus. There could be an entire book written on this, and in fact, books were written on this, as mentioned. And so, to Whoopi's kind of credit here, yes, it wasn't about race in her view. As in, while skin color absolutely mattered, it wasn't the singular thing. And so to them, it wasn't about pure white supremacy. The Jews were white, but that didn't mean that they were white enough, shall we say. Her remarks prompted an immediate response from her co-host, Joy Behar, pointing out the fact that Nazi had also gone after black people and had considered the Jews to be a different race. And there's the key part, because all of this feeds into the fact that to the Nazis, all of these different groupings were different races. Even if you were white, white itself was not a monolithic race. There were different levels within that race again, which they obsessed over, the inevitable wormhole of all racial ideologies. And Ana Navarro argued that the Nazis had been white supremacists who also rounded up gypsies and other groups in addition to Jews. Yes, absolutely. In fact, the Jews were not the only Untermensch, as the Germans called them. They were but one group of these subhumans. The Romani was another big one, and obviously the Slavs, adding in an ideological element as well. And, of course, like practically every single bit of Nazi ideology, it was highly, flexible. Whatever the great leader needed the ideology to be at the time, that was what it was. The idea that the Slavs were Untermensch did not stop them from joining into an alliance with the communists when it suited them best, for example. Sparks fly as the view panel confronts Whoopi after she says the Holocaust isn't about race. No, it's not about race. Well, they consider the Jews a different race, Joy Behar says, which is a pretty good point. But it's about white supremacy. It's about going after Jews and gypsies, Ana Navarro adds. The whole thing is a ginormous little idiot fest. And here's the thing too, I have read a lot about the Second World War. I know more about this than most people did. Most of the previous spiel I got from a book, I think called 16 Years and Hitler's Soldier. It is the tale of a young Norwegian guy who, his country was occupied and he didn't really understand what the hell was going on because he was 16 years old, too young to actually enlist. But to him, this was adventure. This was going out into the world to be part of the military, get the fancy-ass uniforms and everything. And so he signed up to the Wehrmacht. He was then enrolled into the Waffen-SS because they considered the Aryans to be placed into proper Aryan divisions, mostly made up of Estonians and Dutch people, mind you. I do love that. The Nordland divisions and the Norwegian divisions were mostly made up of non-Norwegians, because, well, there wasn't that many of us, and those were around wasn't that interested in signing up most of the time. And he had to undergo extensive lessons and teaching seminars on racial ideology, which, rings an awful lot of bells, doesn't it? It's almost as if we've got that exact same goddamn thing going on right now, but with a different view on the whole racial question. It's weird. It's I don't know. Maybe racial ideology is just bad. I know, a radical suggestion. Nevertheless, I think I'm onto something there. God. Again, though, the interesting part here, to circle back to the point, isn't even the fact that Whoopi Goldberg had part of a point, or simply doesn't understand what she's talking about, or is simply just, placing her own worldview on this, because from the American worldview, it's absolutely correct. You've got a handful of races, white, black, etc. For the Europeans, honestly, I've always been far more nuanced, as we've given far less of a shit about race and far more about nationality, and hell, even local ethnicity. I believe even Whoopi did point out that it was more about ethnicity than race, which, again, theoretically, is far more correct. But the interesting part is that ABC News dared to fire Whoopi Goldberg for this. Suspend Whoopi for 2 weeks. Mother Teresa, the woman who can do nothing wrong, a key fundament along the same lines as Oprah Winfrey, has been suspended. Oh. Maybe there is some progress to be had after all, as the church is beginning to see the ground trembling just ever so slightly beneath it. Always good news. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.